They had been described the same way by the people who knew them for 15 years: reliable, steady, the one who held things together, the one who didn't need much, and every description was accurate, and every description was also a cage, a fixed outline they were expected to stay inside, a version that had been decided years ago and quietly calcified into the only version anyone around them could see. A stranger had no outline for them. No prior version, no established expectation, no accumulated history of who they were supposed to be, and in that absence, something arrived that had been edited out of every room with history in it, something that felt less like a discovery and more like a return. The people who knew them best knew the least current version of them, and the strangers who knew nothing at all were somehow seeing more. If you want to understand exactly why this happens, hit that like button. Welcome to Unfiltered Adulthood, where we explore the quiet shifts that reshape us. Subscribe, and let's get back to the story. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way most things calcify, slowly, incrementally, through repetition rather than decision. The first time someone described them a certain way, it was just an observation: reliable, the steady one, the person who didn't make things complicated, and it was accurate, it was a true thing, it matched something real about who they were at that time in their life, and so they didn't correct it, didn't push back, just absorbed it and moved on. The second time, it felt like being seen, like someone had paid attention, like the description had landed correctly, and so they inhabited it a little more fully, filled the outline a little more completely, became slightly more of the thing they'd been identified as, because being identified felt better than being undefined. By the fifth time, the description had become expectation. And expectation, once established in a relationship, has a gravity that is almost impossible to resist without friction, without the specific discomfort of disappointing someone's existing model of you, without the social cost of being different from the version they'd been relating to, relying on, building their own behavior around. 12 years of accumulated description, 12 years of small confirmations, 12 years of being the reliable one, the steady one, the one who held things together, and somewhere in those 12 years, the description had stopped being a partial truth and become the entire permitted territory, the only version of themselves that this particular configuration of people could receive without it requiring them to update everything they thought they knew. The updating cost was too high. Not calculated consciously, just felt as resistance, as the slight friction of introducing a new version into a system that had been running the old one for over a decade, and so the updating didn't happen, the new version stayed internal, the current reality stayed unshared, and the gap between who they were becoming and who the room believed them to be widened, quietly, without drama, one unshared thing at a time. For close friendships, one family, one long-term relationship. 5 separate systems, each running a version of them that was accurate once, each maintained through the daily labor of not contradicting it, each requiring a slightly different editing of the interior before entry. The editing had become automatic, they didn't notice it happening anymore, didn't experience it as suppression, just as the normal cost of existing inside relationships with history. The stranger was at a conference, a 2-day event, no shared social world, no overlapping contacts, no prior version on file. A conversation started the way conference conversations start, surface and professional, and then something shifted, the way it occasionally does when two people happen to be honest at the same time in the same place. And within 20 minutes they were somewhere real, somewhere the people at home hadn't been in recent memory, not because those people didn't care but because caring and seeing are not the same thing, and the people at home were caring for a version that had stopped being updated. The stranger asked what they actually wanted, not from the conference, not from the career, from the life. And the question landed differently than it should have, landed with more weight than a question from a stranger at a conference had any right to carry, because it was a question none of the people with history had thought to ask in a long time, because everyone with history already believed they knew the answer, had filed the answer, was operating from the filed version without checking whether it was still current. They answered honestly. More honestly than they had answered anything in the rooms with history, more of the interior present in the response than in any recent conversation with the people who supposedly knew them best, and the stranger received it without recalibrating, without the slight adjustment that came when the people at home encountered something that didn't fit the established outline. The stranger had no outline to protect, and that absence was the most spacious thing they had felt in years. They flew home 2 days later, back into the rooms with history, back into the 5 systems running the established versions, and the contrast was so precise, so visible from the outside of it, that something that had been invisible for years became briefly, uncomfortably clear. The people who knew them best were relating to a person who no longer fully existed, and they had been collaborating in that fiction, actively, daily, for longer than they wanted to calculate. The change didn't look like confrontation. There were no conversations about how the relationships had calcified, no announcements about needing to be seen differently, no requests for the people with history to update their models. That approach had been considered and rejected. Not because it was wrong, but because it was the wrong sequence, because introducing a new version of yourself into a system that hasn't been prepared for it produces friction that can destroy the relationship before it produces understanding, and the relationships, for all their limitations, were real, were valued, were not the problem even if the dynamic inside them was. What changed instead was smaller and more sustainable. A single sentence introduced per conversation that didn't fit the established outline, a single opinion offered that contradicted the reliable one's expected position, a single moment of not performing steadiness when steadiness wasn't what was actually present, and then watching what happened, whether the relationship could absorb the deviation without requiring its immediate retraction. Most of them could. That was the data, modest and important. Most of the people with history were not actually attached to the old version so much as habituated to it, not invested in the outline so much as unaware it had become one, and a small deviation introduced without drama didn't require a large defense, just a moment of adjustment, just a brief recalibration, just the relationship doing what good relationships can do when given the material to work with. 3 conversations over 6 weeks, each one slightly more current than the last, each one introducing a slightly more accurate version of who they actually were into a system that had been running the archived one, and the system, mostly, absorbed it, updated, continued. The stranger's question, "What do you actually want?" got asked at home eventually, not to a stranger, to someone with 12 years of history, over dinner on a Tuesday, without announcement, without framing. And the answer that came out was more honest than any answer that room had received in years, and the room, mostly, received it. This is not a story about fixed relationships. Some of the gaps were too wide, one friendship in particular, 8 years of the archived version so thoroughly embedded in the other person's sense of the relationship that the updated version produced genuine disorientation, genuine resistance, genuine grief for the version they'd been relating to. And that friendship contracted, became smaller and more honest simultaneously, which is the accurate description of what happens when a relationship built on a partial version encounters the fuller one. The stranger phenomenon didn't disappear. There are still conversations with people met for the first time that go somewhere the rooms with history don't reach, still moments of unexpected honesty with people who have no prior version on file, still the specific spaciousness of being unknown. But its meaning changed. It stopped being evidence of something wrong with the close relationships and started being information about what all relationships need periodically, which is the permission to update. The editing didn't stop entirely. Some of it is just social grace, some of it is the normal discretion of someone who understands that not every interior thought requires an exterior audience. But the automatic editing, the unconscious suppression of the current version to protect the archived one, that reduced, not completely, not permanently, but enough to change the quality of what was available in the rooms with history. The reliable one is still reliable. That wasn't a lie, it was a partial truth that had been allowed to become the whole story. But reliable now coexists with other things, current things, things that didn't fit the outline and were introduced anyway, and the outline is slightly less fixed than it was, slightly more permeable, slightly more capable of receiving who is actually there rather than who was there a decade ago. The people who know you best are often working from the last version you let them see, and the strangers who know nothing are meeting whoever showed up today.